Good morning. Good morning. We're very glad that you all found over here, because me and my colleague Werner here will introduce some ideas which we've called 5A. 5 A's. Assess and adapt agile activities. And yes, we listened to Scott Ambler very, very thoroughly, and we found out that he was telling about us, or he was talking about us, and that he said, we are no real process experts. And sometimes we think we are, but we realize that we want your help. And we don't want to throw away all of the things that were somehow developed during the last decades. And I don't think we're going to tell you that we're going to throw away CMMI and SPICE and TPI, etc. Although, if you only read the slides, maybe that could come up in your mind. But yeah, let's start from the beginning and introduce ourselves. Okay.
There's that machine that.
I thought you were doing this, but it's okay.
You
no
switch
problem.
your slides, I switch mine.
Oh, good. So 5A, assess and adapt agile activities. What does it mean? I don't know. But first, introduction of ourselves. So this is me. I'm Dutch. That's why I speak such horrible English.
And German.
And German, correct, because I live in Germany since 2005 and work in Germany since 1998, I suppose, or 1999. I don't remember, actually.
You're working somewhere?
What?
You are working somewhere?
No. So somehow I managed to show some activities that other people think I'm working, something like this.
Earn some money.
Yeah, that's the good part. So, the interesting part is that, okay, 15 years in IT, it's okay, but what I did before was much more interesting. Because this gave me an insight in, let's say, human things, team things, individual things, people issues, sociology, the way people work together or alone, something like ethics, etc. This was part of my study and also part of the job I did afterwards. I was working as a program manager cross-border development. So communes from Belgium and Germany and Luxembourg trying to work together and trying to get funding of the European institutions and then trying to do some projects. Since 1996, I said, okay, now I have to change this pattern and I'm going in a technical direction in order to be able to speak with you and with other people with a technical background, just to make sure that I don't miss out on these technical issues. So that's why I changed into IT. Working in the Netherlands, doing test management and all kinds of activities related to testing since 1996. Lead of a team, agility and quality. Sounds great, doesn't it? And I'm also a trainer for several schemes. So certification is also a very popular thing. My personal view is that everything that brings testing further is a contribution that we should respect and that we should use. Okay, that's why I also do trainings. Your turn. Oh.
Yes. Thank you. So a few words regarding myself. I started out as a developer in assembly language programming, developed safety-critical software for railway control systems. And I've been in software quality assurance now for about 10 years. I'm also a trainer for the ISTQB schemes and for the CAT training. And I think that's an important thing that Arjan just mentioned. We try to get a view not just on the technical part of agile teams, but also on the soft skills, on the working together, on how the team dynamics are working, and that also influenced the ideas that we want to present here. And the ideas actually were inspired by the Agile Manifesto. So if we look at the Agile Manifesto, there is one word in there that we talked about this morning, that Scott Emler talked about this morning, and that's the word processes. So although processes do not have the paramount importance in agile teams, lots of the failures that occur in agile teams are due to lack of observing core practices, the basic process framework that we have. And that was the idea that inspired us. We have to do something about that. We have to give people a chance to find out, why do projects fail? What are the reasons? How can I see that an agile team is failing, and how can I see signs very early that there might be some problems? And that so that made us get together one evening far away from here in Romania,
Timisoara.
In Timisoara,
of all places.
2 bottles of red wine, and we were thinking of what can we do about that. What would be an idea? And the initial idea was to make an assessment, get people to assess their processes. But then very soon we found out, no, you can't really apply the traditional assessment ideas on that. There's another dynamic within agile teams. We have not just a process framework, we also have individuals that work there. We have a team and a team spirit that is part of the whole picture. And all 3 aspects actually influence what you're doing and whether you are successful or not. And the Agile framework is an important part of it. And whatever Agile framework you choose, you might choose Scrum, you might choose something different. There is a proven set of ceremonies, a proven set of rules that you want to follow. And if you do not follow this set of rules, chances are that at some point in time you observe some problems that might occur. And the problem with that is that you cannot immediately see that these problems are related to the things that you might not have implemented correctly in the first place. So that was another focus we had. And we thought, let's try to build the link, or to find the links between the problems that occur and the reasons for that. And that was not an easy task, because we started to interview companies and we got very different feedback from the companies. It was not a straightforward thing. I do this wrong, and next morning I see the result of that, and I can correct it. Very often it was much more subtle. But we concentrated on the Agile framework here, and we found that unless you observe the core practices in a balanced way, there are chances that you run into problems. And we only want to concentrate on the Agile framework here. You also probably run into problems if you ignore team dynamics that you have, if you ignore individual needs, but that shall not be part of this talk here. We want to concentrate on the Agile framework. Scrum, for example, would be one of these frameworks. During the interviews that we did, we found out that a lot of companies implement Scrum in a adjusted way, in a modified way.
In an agile way.
In what they call an agile way. Yes, we really like this idea about not documenting, let's do that. And all the other stuff, no, don't worry about that. We'll do it as we always did, but the non-documentation idea, that it really attracts us. So you had companies doing that. I had a company, they said they implemented Scrum because the problem with them was after each release, for the first 2 weeks, developers didn't have any work to do, because that's when the people were writing the specifications for the next release. And they didn't like that the developers were sitting there just for 2 weeks, not doing any work.
It's a waste, isn't it?
So that's when they said there is something like an agile method that takes care of that, so the developers can start right away. But they still were applying all their old process rules. They didn't change any of the processes. They just decided to deliver in increments so that the developers could start working from day one. So they sort of wrote like one chapter of the specification, gave it to the developers and said, oh, we're doing Agile now, so you can already start working on this incomplete specification. So there are various ideas in the heads of the people of how to implement this. And that was one of the things we found out. Core practices were not used in the process model, or they were modified so strongly that you did not recognize them. And as I mentioned, the effects only showed up gradually. It was not in the first sprint that people failed. It was after 5 or 6 sprints that something came up. Velocity dropped of the team. And nobody knew why. Because if you ask people, what are you doing? They were still thinking they complied to all the rules that they have. And you had to try to find the reason for that. And there was an analysis process related to that, which gave us some of the answers why projects fail. But of course, these were individual problems and individual solutions. We have no idea if you can apply these generally to similar projects. But we have the vision that we might be able to create a knowledge framework which allows us to do that. So another problem point was that companies did not only start their agile work with an incomplete core practices framework, but also that their retrospectives that they did were biased by the fact that they were themselves part of the team that they were trying to improve. And so we had blind spots, not personal blind spots, we had blind spots for the team. So the team was adjusting the process, yes, but they were missing out on some important areas that they didn't see. We even had one company that we interviewed where people avoided retrospectives. So they said, retrospective, that's not good for us. We do everything else as the Scrum asked us to do, but retrospectives, that's not a good idea. And again, we will see that in a few slides. There was a reason behind that, why these people avoided the retrospectives. Well, I can tell you now, the reason behind that was that the retrospective was used by their former team leader for controlling them. So he was always attending the retrospectives, and they were using that data from the retrospective to command the team as good as he could in the new role. And that is what they were trying to avoid. But again, that was a thing that was not obvious. It took us some time to find out the reasoning behind that. So trying to analyze these problems, one of the ideas was to apply traditional assessment methods to that. So we said, let's take a TPI and adapt that so it fits the agile processes as well.
That's no problem. You can do that.
Yes, you can do that. I'm not sure if it works.
Okay, that's a different question.
Yes,
but you can adjust the TPI model in order to fit, let's say, agile core practices.
Oh, yes. Of course, you can do that. But the problem is these models, they pretty much focused on the sequential development models. So a TPI assessment does not lend itself very nicely to an agile method. So we did away with that idea, and we thought we need something more particular for that, some new way of assessing. And the interviews that we did initially to gather some data on where there is a problem in the community, that seemed to be one way of, or it seemed to be a step in the right direction. We used these interviews to gather a lot of data that allowed us to assess a company, how well are they implementing their agile processes, but also to give us some ideas that we thought we might be able to generalize. We were trying to see some patterns there. Typical things companies did not implement correctly, and typical outcomes as a result of that reduced implementation that we had. Although this relationship between the cause and the effects was very difficult to observe. In most cases, it was strongly time delayed. So you had 4, 5, 6, maybe 10 sprints between the things that you started to not implement correctly until you saw the effect. So that was this relationship. To see that relationship and to analyze that relationship, that proved to be quite difficult. So the idea behind the 5A was then, if we can't do it with a direct assessment, let's try something else. Let's try the idea of getting these data, not just getting these data from interviews, getting these data from the real world, but do not just use the data that we are actually gathering, but let's make that an idea that is open, where a lot of people can contribute, where we give ourselves the chance to have enough data to observe certain patterns and to use these patterns to link effects that we see to possible causes that we have. So that was the idea behind the 5A. But it is not simply an adapted assessment method like this example here, which is from TPI.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a pretty successful attempt.
Oh yeah, it's an successful attempt, but in our view that does not carry far enough. You could do an assessment like that. You go into a company and you ask them, well, are you doing retrospectives? Yes. How are you doing retrospectives? Tell me how you do a retrospective. And if they say, well, we ask what went well, what didn't go so well, what can we improve? If everyone knows that this is the way to do a retrospective, we can tell them, okay, you can get grade A on that one, so the maturity level of A. They might have a more sophisticated way of doing retrospectives. They might actually measure if the implementation works, gives them the desired improvement. If they do that, they get to level B. If they use retrospective data from other teams to improve their own processes, they might even get to the maturity level C. That would be one way of going about it. But we thought that's not the way that we want to go. We had a different idea. And our idea was actually to, on the basis of the interviews that we did, to try to find and identify patterns by looking at core practices of Scrum, by finding out how people are, what are people omitting that run into problems? What did they do wrong? Maybe long time ago when they started to do that. Maybe in iteration 0, in their sprint 0 that they implemented. So we were looking at all of these points in our interview, and we had some examples from companies that showed these problems. So we had a company where the team velocity went down, and they didn't know why. And what we found out is that the developers would not refactor the code. And when we asked why wouldn't the developers refactor the code? Well, because they were afraid to modify the running code. Why are you afraid to modify the running code? You have a regression test. Oh yes, we have regression tests, but we have not automated the regression tests. We thought, so that might be the underlying reason that they had a different attitude on test automation. So they thought they can do their acceptance test without automating the test, because they had experts sitting there that were very able to very fast run through the tests. And they were happy with their releases. They had a stringent release scheme. They didn't release after each iteration. They made 4 or 5 iterations, and then they had another release. They did a test before the release, and they did not feel the need to automate. And multiple sprints later, that problem popped up, that the velocity of the team dropped. And analysis showed that there is a relationship between the problem of velocity dropping and the problem of not making a decision towards a high degree of automation. Or we had another example where teams avoid retrospectives. That was the example that I just mentioned earlier, where they found out that their former team leader was using them to control them, with the argument, well, in the end, I'm still responsible for the functionality of the software, so I want to control the team. I want to be there in the retrospective. I want to find out what they did well and where they don't perform.
And it's beautiful if they give you the arguments, okay?
Yes, yes. It's easy for me to control them if they get together and talk about what didn't go so well. So from a team leader's point of view, that was a good thing, the retrospectives. But the team was hesitant in implementing that. Again, that was not obvious that you could see that. The only thing you could see is that somehow they were not able to address obvious problems that they had within the team, things that you would address in a retrospective, and only multiple steps of analysis led to that cause of the problem. Or we had other examples of people that have like an attitude, a false hero attitude. You have 1 or 2 developers or testers that want to do everything by themselves, that are not able to distribute data within the team. And there are possible reasons behind that. In that case, there was some basic training missing on how people should work together in an agile team. And these heroes, they were thinking, well, it's their task to carry the team along. If they have more experience, it's their task to take on more work, and they were not in a real team spirit because of a lack of knowledge.
I would even give him more work.
Yes, they would.
Just overload him with work.
Yeah. Yes, because they can't say no.
Yeah.
And I think they make the major contribution. Mm-hmm. Another relationship we found is that stand-up meetings started to last an hour and a half. And again, it was a long chain of questioning, a long chain of analysis to come to some of the causes of that. One of the causes was apparently that the team did not want to use a task board, and when we analyzed or asked why don't you want to use a task board, they had a funny reason for that. They said, well, there are salespeople running through our. Well, they said we don't have a room that we can lock. And I said, well, would you want to lock in a task board? That's a communication instrument, should be out in the open. Yeah, we have salespeople running around in our company. Okay, so what about the salespeople?
They're selling what you're going to develop next year or tomorrow.
They're the ones that sell what you're going to develop with the next release. And yes, they said, but these salespeople, if they come past the task board and they see a feature that we even might have put on there as a design spike, for example, they immediately sell that to the customers. So they go out and tell the customer, look, this is what we can offer you. Do you want that? And when the customer says yes, they go back into the company and say, look, there is a customer demand on exactly that feature. So it becomes a force that the development department and the company as a whole did not want to have. So that's how they avoided that problem. Again, that relationship or that problem only showed up multiple months after they had made the decision to do away with the task board. Oh. I'm not sure where we were in our chain of...
There, somewhere.
There, that's where we were. Other interesting example we had. We had a company that was still organized in testing departments and development departments, but they were doing Agile projects. So for an Agile project, the development department took some of the developers, and they had to buy a tester from the testing department to join them. They had to pay for that. Internally, these were different cost centers. So the developers got the contract from the customer. It was a fixed price contract. And they were not allowed to use all the money for the testing for the development resources. They also had to use some of the money for the testers. So what they did, they bought one tester to join the team. And of course, you can imagine that never would a developer assist the tester in doing any work because the tester was running on a different budget than the developer. And if the developer started to do that, the development manager would say, why are you wasting development money on testing? If more testing is needed, we have to buy an additional tester. Yes, but if you buy an additional tester, that will cut into our budget. So they were trying to minimize the cost. And that, of course, was completely contradictory to this cross-functionality idea that we have. So none of the developers was interested in learning anything about testing. None of the testers was interested in assisting the developers. And that then caused the problem that the team was very uncommitted to what they do. And they actually had, I think that was the same team, this one. Their solution was they make two definitions of done. They make a definition of done for the developers, so that they say, well, we are done, and then they made another definition of done that included the testing and the testing activities. And that usually ran 1 or 2 sprints behind the normal way of working. Again, all of that, what is written here in just a few lines, the result of some analysis work, of talking to people for a longer time, trying to find out the reasons behind that. So when we had these data, we had immediately the idea of saying, well, let's not make an artificial scheme how to assess agile activities. Let's try to use these sort of data. Let's try to get more of this data, and let's try to identify some patterns in this data, and then make that available to you, to the community, so that you can use that for your projects, so that you have a source of information that if one of your customers or you for yourself decide, well, let's implement Scrum, but let's not do test-driven development. That doesn't seem to be good for us. You can look in here and say, what are typical problems that arise if you do not implement test-driven development? What are the indicators that allow you to detect them early? And maybe that helps you to avoid the pitfalls of it.
Thank you very much. So I think I again showed that you can have persons to do the job and just listen very carefully and add some remarks and maybe add some value as well. Hopefully I will. So this is the general idea. Werner presented this idea to you. It's about, let's say, joining forces and trying to find out which patterns are out there, which patterns of symptoms and causes we can identify, and how are we going to make them available to all of us. Okay? It's not about gathering information and collecting it and sitting on it, but it's about sharing this information with all of you guys. Well, you can give it modern names like knowledge base, and you can try to invent very nice names out of it. And I think 5A says it all, because if you have an A, it's usually the first position. You can find it on top. Okay, it's like with my name, Arjan. It's one of the first names in the alphabet, of course. And if you have 2 A's, there's nobody that will be before you, that will come before you. If you have 5 A's, so chances are really small that people have a model or an idea or whatever that comes before you. And 5A says adapt and adjust agile activities. Okay, so the general idea is that we join forces, that we find out which symptoms lead or have which causes, that we're going to share these ideas, and that we are going to offer a platform to make this happen. Okay? And the basic question that we have, or maybe a tip or hint or idea or question to you all, become a member of the 5A community and join forces in getting these data together and really also trying to get more benefit for your customers and for yourselves.
There's another slide that shows
There's
some
another
first
slide.
ideas. Yes.
Oh,
Look.
look. It's a cause-effect database. That's a nice name. I couldn't have invented that one. So it's about the causes of the problems that Werner has presented to you, and about what are the effects that you can see. And they are interrelated, but how? Okay, so you have simple relations, and you have complex relations. The problem is that one effect can have more than one cause, of course. And of course, it's maybe as a next step, it's not so easy to also try to solve these problems. Because by just implementing core practices that were left out beforehand, might not be the solution. Maybe you need more. Maybe you need different kind of things to bring in place.
Like an additional training, maybe.
Oh, yeah. That could be a good idea. But let's say, based on my background, I think especially the social skill things are a challenge for all of us.
Yes.
Okay, so it should be an open platform where everybody can upload and download the causes and effects. Maybe it also can help us with something like analysis of results. So we describe what we found at our customer side, an effect, and the model or the platform is giving you some possible causes with their specific interrelations. Maybe we can do something with benchmarking of process quality. Maybe we can try to find out, okay, how good are we? How well are we? And then we're going into this direction like TPI and CMMI, etc. So we should check on that. But it can be an idea. We only said these are first ideas how to implement it. So we don't have a platform today, but we can have a platform tomorrow. More. Okay. And what we'd like to point out is that of course, all data in the platform should be anonymized, should be anonymous. Okay, so some companies like to present all of their data, other companies don't. We should respect that and be careful with that.
Yeah, so there will be the possibility to even upload it in an anonymized way already. So don't rely on us anonymizing it. You can do that if you want to contribute.
Yeah, I didn't want to do the job, so.
Yes, and it makes works easier for us as well.
Lots
Good
easy.
point.
Yeah, and we're sure that there are many other things that we didn't think of today. Like, what about the quality of the contributions? Should we do some checks on that? And who is going to do these checks? Okay, so there are multiple questions that we love to discuss with you. Not only now, because we only have 3 more minutes, I suppose, but we are here, we are all around, and we hope to be able to discuss those ideas with you. Yeah.
So be invited to comment on these ideas, because I'm quite sure all of you are much smarter than just the two of us.
That for sure.
So we're happy to answer some questions, to listen to some remarks now.
Yeah, that's what's missing here, the question mark.
Yes.
Any questions? Now. Maybe the mic.
Hello, and thanks for your talk. Is there already a website to upload data or something?
No, not yet. We wanted to present our ideas and wait for the feedback of all of you. And then we're going into the next steps, which is also included. So the setup of the platform is also included in the next steps.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, welcome.
Hello, thanks for the talk at first. I would like to know, do you have some concrete ideas how you would gather the data, how you would structure it? So will there be a catalog of aspects that might contribute to one of the 5 sections, or is it still completely open and you are thinking about it and discussing it?
Well, we do have an interview guide that we used for the initial interviews that we did. And I think that would be the step that we develop that into, say, like a checklist that you could use then to structure your data regarding the description of these projects. Yes?
Okay, thanks.
First, thanks for your talk. And I more have a suggestion. Maybe you could partner with some software engineering research facilities, because what you're trying to do is essentially gathering qualitative data, which is really hard to do and especially to analyze, because all the descriptions you will get are very subjective. And it's when you want to distill patterns or something, it's really hard to do so that it's valuable and transferable for other companies. So I think this is a great idea, but it's also quite challenging.
What did Scott Ambler told us before?
He likes surveys.
I was thinking about the other one.
Okay.
Never run away for difficult and challenging things.
Yes, but I can see that. You're very right. It is very subjective. We noted that. You might talk about the identical project with a different person. You get a different opinion. But again, that would just be the number 2 opinion we put in the line with all the others that we have. And we're not sure if this will be an automated process matching later on the initial plans that you have to a possible problem that might have to be a manual process that someone has to make, looking on the data that we have. Some of that can be automized, I think, but there will always be a human component in that because it's a very complex set of information.
Okay, maybe we have time for one more question.
So regarding the last topic, I would suggest to keep it simple at first, meaning text-based, and then it will emerge by itself, by being used, and then you will see the patterns. That's one comment.
Yes.
The other comment I wanted to make, complementary to your approach, I know there are some presentations by Ken Schwaber and others probably on explaining exactly, because you focused on Scrum, but we can do this for anything else. But
Yes.
on Scrum alone, there are some presentations which describe pretty much whenever you leave one of these things out, this is what can happen. So it can go both ways. I mean, not just looking back and saying what went wrong, it's because this.
Yes.
It's also, if you leave by
Yes,
Scrum is really, there's a good explanation, and you can probably find the presentation somewhere on YouTube.
You can use it
The
both.
issue is that it's not just about leaving one thing out, but also, let's say, adjusting another thing, and maybe because of all these combinations, you have specific problems. That's what is, let's say, not paid too much attention to until now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And one last question, sorry. Yeah, the gentleman.
Still have time for one
Yeah.
question. Okay.
They will say so.
Yeah, I just want to go with my colleague before talking. Statistic-based analysis is nice, but I personally would prefer also to have like kind of war stories, how have other people tackled the problem, and there just a plain story view would also be helpful. So build it up bi-directional at least. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Fine. So thanks
Thank
for your feedback and your ideas.
Thank you very much.